You are listening to the Mom on Purpose podcast, episode 16. Today, we're talking with my friend Tracy about making Mealtime a ministry to your family. Welcome to Mom on Purpose podcast. If this is your first time listening, thanks for coming. The Mom on Purpose podcast is produced every week. Come back often and please subscribe in iTunes. All links and materials referenced are in the show notes, which you'll find at momonpurpose.com. Every episode of Mom on Purpose begins with a quick mom verse picked for your encouragement as a mom. Today I want to talk about a common passage in Matthew 28. It's typically referred to as the Great Commission. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." In saying this, I do not in any way intend to diminish cross-cultural missions. In fact, I highly celebrate that, and I love hearing stories of missionaries. But you know what? Motherhood is a season, and it's a season when you can make disciples. This passage is interesting because a lot of people focus on going, but actually, if you look at the Greek, the emphasis of the passage is on the verb make, as in make disciples. And the point is that Jesus is commanding us to go and make disciples. That's the emphasis of the passage. And I want to tell you, Mama, that your job there in the home is doing this very thing. And you may not get this message elsewhere. You may not feel like what you're doing has eternal significance to it. But I want to tell you that it does. It's kind of sneaky because when you are first doing those first few years, it doesn't seem like disciple making. And you know what? I think Jesus felt that way sometimes. Sometimes he was hanging out on a hillside with his disciples. Sometimes they totally weren't getting it. Sometimes he was taking a nap and they wake him up. Sometimes he's trying to get away by himself and they still come and seek him out. And that sounds like the life of a young mom. At this point, my oldest is 15 years old. And while we haven't done everything perfectly, I do believe that I'm making a disciple. And I just want to hold that out for you as something that if you only have a 2-year-old, you may not yet be seeing. But there is fruit ahead. There is disciple making ahead. There is life on life discipling that happens in this daily work of motherhood. And it is important, and I believe it's part of the answer to this call that Jesus gave to his disciples. Now let's jump into our conversation with Tracy Grossman. Hi, Tracy.
Hello.
I'm excited to have you back. You helped me launch Mom on Purpose, and so now we get to do this one where I get to interview you. First, go ahead and tell us a little bit about you and your family, the kind of things that you're up to and that sort of thing.
Well, I am a mom of 6. My oldest is 11. And my youngest one, you can probably hear in the background, is 6 months old. And she's just a joy, as are the rest of them too. But we live out on a little postage stamp of kind of like a little hobby farm in the middle of nowhere, Iowa. And I'm married to my husband of 14 years. And I stay at home and I homeschool and do a couple little part-time jobs from home. And most recently, I wrote the companion to Misty Winkler's Simplified Dinners. I did the breakfast and lunch portion of that, book. She did the dinner part, and I just kind of added the other two to her collection. So that's been what I've been doing.
Yeah, I've seen those, and I love everything that I have learned from Misty Winkler. I just really appreciate her approach, and it's a really down-to-earth approach to managing our homes and organizing our lives. We actually had her on in season 1 of Mom on Purpose, so I'll be sure to link to that in the show notes. But since you do kind of have this insight into meal planning and preparation, and especially having written and put together these books, I wanted to invite you to come on to talk about the challenges that moms face when we think through things like planning meals and cooking and our approach to meal times. Many of us, grew up in very fast food eating. Many articles, secular and Christian, have talked about the decline of the family dinner table. And so I just want to have a really practical encouragement to offer to moms who are trying to figure these things out. What can you flesh out for us? What challenges do we face as we think about these things?
So many. And I think the biggest thing for me, as a mom of many little kids, is just the relentlessness of mealtime. That you wake up in the morning and already people are hungry, and before you know it, it's lunch. Or if you're sending kids off to school, you've got to pack the lunches, and then there's dinner, and it's just it's a never-ending cycle of feeding people, and so I think it can just feel like a relentless train. That it's not like a one and done thing, and it gets exhausting. I think we also, there's a lot of other stuff in life that feels really important. So I think it's very easy meals are done and then you have to redo it. So it's not like something you can check off the list, like say painting a bedroom or anything like that. There's so many other things that we feel like, well, there should be some other things that are doable in the day. And it is time consuming to cook. It just really is a time consuming part of life. Sometimes I think, picky kids or allergies can make that part of dinner or any kind of meal exhausting, because you look at it more as like a battlefield rather than like a time of blessing.
Yeah.
I know there's lots of families that sit down and the mom's just like cringing, like waiting for, hey, this is going to be, I know they're not going to appreciate all the work that went into this. And that can be discouraging, I think. And then I think for me too, there's like a mental puzzle that goes along with it, that in order to plan a week of meals, you've got your, what's the sales? What do I already have in the pantry? What sounds good? What do we do this week? What do I have time to do? It is a huge mental puzzle to put together. And so a lot of times we just put it off because it's like doing all that thought process is really a lot of work. And then all of a sudden it's 5:30 and it's like, oh yeah, that part, you know? And then in a really practical way, sometimes we just lack basic knowledge of how to cook and how to improvise. I know that was a big part for me. I did not have a lot of cooking knowledge when I was first married. And so it was really stressful because I felt like everything seemed like a monumental task because I couldn't just whip out some biscuits. Like that wasn't something in my repertoire. So it was always a recipe, always looking at, well, how does that work? How do I do that? Yeah. So just some basic knowledge that maybe would have been something I would have had 100 years ago, but don't necessarily have nowadays when we start our families. So, yeah. And I mean, not to mention, oh, Jess, even the psychological, what our society seems is important. And is the kitchen totally messy? And that's discouraging. And so I don't even want to go in there, let alone, so there's so many things that can get in the way of just making the next meal,
Yeah. I can identify with so many of those that you mentioned. And I wonder, what do you think? I mean, you've kind of put your head into this whole area of life more than many of us. What do you think the number one reason is that moms fail to succeed in this area of meal planning and even just the cooking process?
I think a really big part of it is cultural. 100 years ago, it would have just been part of our lives. And nowadays we have so many options, so many choices, and we haven't had the kind of just the knowledge of the back of your hand kind of training that is just really simple. You just put together a soup. Like, that's pretty stress inducing for a lot of people. And so I think there's a big, I don't necessarily even think, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, that our culture totally values like the family meal. And so there's not a lot of incentive to really put a huge amount of time into it. I mean, the research shows it's really good for us to do, but culturally, I don't think we feel like that's a place where we're really valued as moms,
that's
as
right.
women, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. And what you said is right. Like, there are things like soups that used to be second nature to women that now, like when I moved here to Washington, I mean, in Texas, things don't get that cold, the weather. And so we don't eat a lot of soup, or I didn't grow up eating soup. But here, soup is like a huge part of the fall and the winter months, where that's like, I hear people talk about it and they're like, oh, it's fall. It's time for us to start eating soups again. And I'm like, I have to learn. I'm the girl pulling out the recipe going, okay, so celery, and let's see, then I do chicken broth, and I'm totally learning that kind of stuff. But it's been new to me. And there are so many things that you just think, gosh, 200 years ago or 2,000 years ago, I would have known how to do this, no problem. And now it seems like such a challenge.
A funny story about that. My husband, when I was we were just dating, I was in college, and he came to visit, and he was raised, his mom had him cooking, like by the time they were in, I want to say 6th or 7th grade, each of her kids had a night of the week they were in charge of. And when he came, and one day he was there in the evening, and I said, well, we don't have any food here. We are just going to have to go out to eat. And he's like, what do you mean you don't have any food here? And my roommate and I, like, to us, that meant we don't have boneless, skinless chicken breasts or noodles. Like that, that was, what else do you eat, right? And so he started looking, he's like, well, I can make you some dinner. And I'm like, no, there is no food here, literally. And he made this like amazing soup out of like leftover toppings from a pizza and like just some random stuff in the pantry. And I remember it just felt like magic. I mean, both my roommate and I were like, how did you do that? It was just it was like magic.
Wow.
And I think it can kind of feel like that. You don't understand the concepts behind something like soup, that you're really just taking some flavors, adding some water, and making it work.
Okay, so given that history that you've just kind of laid out for us, how then did you stumble on your solution that now you're writing cookbooks?
Necessity is the mother of invention. It really was a process for me. I used to be so bad, Jess. I would actually, not only did it have to be boneless, skinless chicken breast, but I would actually wear gloves to touch them. Like I would have like... I was just so creeped out. And, a couple of things happened in the process of that. I got married, and I still remember the day that he brought home a 5-gallon food grade bucket to keep my flour in. And we didn't have any kids at this point. And I looked at him, and I was actually mad at him, because I was like, you don't understand. I will never cook enough to need 5 gallons of flour. And of course, now I'm like, okay, so I've got 3 5-gallon buckets. Can I have 4? Like, do we have a place for that? Because we've got so many kids now, and we go through so much more food. But really, for him, for me, it was a lot of him teaching me bit by bit how to cook and how to think outside the box and what a roux was and that kind of stuff. So he kind of downloaded a lot of his knowledge to me over the years. And cooking and food really is a love language for him. So I when I was pregnant with my first son, could live on Cheerios and bananas. And there were days where he'd come home from work and he'd be like, so have you thought about dinner? I'm like, yeah, I'm thinking Cheerios again, and he'd be like, they're not a meal, Tracy, but it's like, to me, that was fine, but to him that said, I don't care about you, and so as we kind of worked those things out, and I started to see that really feeding him and feeding my kids is a way of loving them, not just something that I have to do. It's not just a to-do list item that got in my way throughout the day, but it was really a way to serve and love the people that I love. And that it really did communicate like that. I started wanting to do it better. And I started calling up my mom and saying, okay, Mom, how do I make this recipe? And can I come learn that from you? And calling his mom and saying, come teach me how to make bread. I need to know how to do this. And then we moved out into the middle of nowhere, and it took all my fast food and takeout options away, because to go out here, we live 45 minutes from the nearest town. And so if you get off work at, say, 5, you get home at, say, 6, and then you decide to load up the little kids and go out for dinner, you're talking about coming home at 10 o'clock at night. And it only took us twice of that kind of pain. And we were like, that is not worth it. So it really had to become a necessity that I had to come up with food every day to feed my people. So I had to get good at it, I guess.
Okay. So tell me more about that, because I know I can relate to that. I remember my mom talking about how when she got married, she literally didn't even know how to make rice. And her husband, my dad, is a Cajun from South Louisiana. And so rice was like, a daily staple. So he actually taught her, kind of similar to you, he taught her a lot of the things that he knew. But share with us, tell us more. How did you learn to do better, not just in the cooking process, but actually changing the way you were thinking about it to a way of, like you said, loving and serving, ministering to your family?
It is such a process. It really does kind of ebb and flow in both of those. Like, as you get better, it's not so overwhelming. You make a pie 5 times and then the 6th pie isn't so stressful. So part of it was that. And comic things like I'd be making a recipe and I'd be out of something like vanilla, and I would lament, oh no, I cannot make cookies anymore. I don't have vanilla, which is totally not an essential ingredient, but I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And he'd be like, well, I don't know. Why don't you just substitute it for some almond extract or something? And I'd look at him like, you can do that? So, as I learned that, like, the chemistry of it really wasn't as scary as I thought it was, that helped a lot. But there was also some pivotal things. Like, there was one point, again, we were living out here. One day I remember this very clearly. I had 3 little kids inside, and 2 of them were crying, and I was trying to make dinner, and I was feeling really crummy about it. Like, why am I in here trying to make dinner? And he's outside in the quiet working, which to me sounded like bliss, because I'm trying to work with loud, and the stress and the kids around, and you're trying to accomplish things, and it just feels like you're 2 steps forward and 6 steps back. And so I went out kind of in a huff, and I just said, can I just trade you? And he looked at me and he was like, well, yes, you can. And he left me, and I think he was cleaning out like a barn or something. Something that was very physically, and it was winter. So it was a very physical job, and it was cold outside. And he went inside, and I thought, oh, finally, like some quiet. Well, I spent 2 hours out there working, and it was hard. And I was bone tired by the time I was done. And when I came in, he had prepared a beautiful meal. And I remember thinking, I feel so cared for, that I'm tired, my bones ache, my muscles ache. And even though I didn't have the noise, I really was physically tired. And to come in and have a meal that had been thoughtfully prepared for me, because again, food is his love language. So this was not hard for him, but it was such an illustration to me that every day he comes home, that's how he feels. If I think about him and put something, and so I was so thankful for that, because it really did show me like, yeah, this is a love language that you were thought of, that somebody prepared something for you.
Yeah.
And it does, I think a lot of times we think about meals being a checklist thing, or like I'm getting calories into this person. And a lot of times we're like, how can I get less calories into my person? You know, we get so clinical about it, right? And really, a meal is so much more than that. It's a conversation. It's a way to nourish and to build people's souls after a long, hard day away from each other. And when you think about it being that kind of conversation, it allows you to be a little bit more creative with it, you know?
That's definitely a different picture than just getting to 5 o'clock and like, got to get the chicken breast, I got to get the noodles and just get it out there.
Right.
Well, okay. So what benefits have you seen from adopting this area of feeding your family as a place of daily faithfulness?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think first of all, we all eat better. You know, I do know this is not my default. Like, so I can wax philosophical and I can get there, but you know, in general, I'm a pretty practical person. And so, you know, my husband's been away on business for a couple weeks, and it's very easy for me to get back into, hey guys, what about some Cheerios for dinner? Like it is a practice. It's not something that I've gotten, but I do notice there is a difference in how everybody feels. There's a difference in how I feel when we can sit down at the end of a day and have something, or even in the middle of the day, man, you know, cause like that's when, I asked Misty about the breakfast and lunch side of things, because I noticed getting halfway through the morning and the kids would be getting a little squirrely and a little cranky. And I'd be sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, it's 11. What am I even going to feed these people? And I started feeling that 5:30 anxiousness, like at 11 in the morning with lunch, and then feeling it again at 5:30 with supper. And so just having something cooking throughout the morning, I just noticed there's such a calm feeling of like, oh, I've got a plan. It's ready. I don't have to think about it. It leaves brain space for other things.
Oh, that's good.
Leela Lawler writes about that. She says, you can't do anything until you know what's for dinner. And that's the truth. If I want to accomplish something in the day, I have to know what's for dinner, because otherwise I have this like low level anxiety that's kind of eating away at me. And I feel like, oh, I can't do that. I don't know what we're going to have for dinner. Like there's you can't really throw yourself totally into a big project or anything, because it just eats away at you. Like, this is coming. It's coming. You're going to have to do this.
That's a great description. A low level stress on you all day. I've definitely felt that. And I've gone through different iterations of meal planning, but certainly having a plan always trumps not having a plan.
Isn't that the truth? Yeah, it's like it doesn't necessarily have to be done, but just knowing that you have everything and what it is that you're going to eat makes a world of difference.
Yeah. So okay. So how have you then, tell us a little bit about the practical ways that you go about breakfast planning and lunch planning, since that's kind of your forte. Share with us a big picture overview of what that looks like for you.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's different in each season. Part of the reason that I wanted to write those for Missy is because I loved, well, really her simplified dinners was such a lifesaver for me as a tool that I thought, oh, I need this tool for breakfast and lunch. So really, I wrote it for myself too, or mostly, not because, you know what I mean? Because I was like, well, I want to have to not stress about this throughout the morning, throughout the afternoon. So different seasons, it's looked different. Like right now, I try to think through, okay, well, I need to have granola. You know, I have a group of, I have like 3 or 4 options, so that when the week starts, whatever I feel up to, whatever sounds good, I can just have that ready to go. I really like to do where we make muffins and we stick them in the freezer on Saturday, and we can just pull them out as we go. At different times I've done, we're all going to eat breakfast at 7 a.m, right before school. And other times it works better where it's like, you grab what sounds good to you when you wake up, and the next person grabs what sounds good to them when they wake up. but I have to have the options there, or I really have a hard time in the mornings because it's just hard to start the day. When you make breakfast, it's like admitting that the day has started. You really need to pretend like you're an adult and start moving. I like to put that stage off. It is. It's like, oh, I'm in charge of all these people. I need to start the day. And I have a couple of really early risers, and so when they walk down and it's, oh my goodness, honey, it's only 6 and what's for breakfast? And if I can just say, well, these things are in the freezer, or this granola has been made, or I've got oatmeal cooking already. That is a much calmer conversation than me thinking, oh my goodness, that means I have to stop my quiet time. He's already hungry. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and you mentioning the soups at the beginning, that is so, this time of year that I'm a Washingtonian. I grew up in Washington. And so I totally know that feeling. And this is the time of year that I'm like, I cannot wait for soup season because you can really make a huge pot of soup. There's just nothing better than doing that this time of year. And so I will make like 2 or 3 soups and we'll just kind of rotate through them throughout the week and not have to, one on Monday. And if we have leftovers, or if we don't, we'll make a new one for Tuesday. And so we just keep it simple for breakfast and lunch and make ahead as much as possible, really, truly, especially during the school year.
Well, beyond practical solutions, what spiritual principles come into play when we're thinking about meal planning and taking care of our families?
Yeah, I think like we talked about, getting back to the purposes behind what we're doing, to the why. Anytime we talk about any kind of thing we do for our family or outside, if we can pull ourselves out of the practical and realize that what we're walking out really is a spiritual thing. We oftentimes want to say, oh, I want some kind of ministry, or we're going to feed the hungry or whatever. But, we have hungry in our homes. That our kids are not just an extension of ourselves. They're not like an arm. You know what I mean? Each one of our children is an eternal soul. Each one of our family members will last forever. And they're here for just a really short time. They're part of our homes where we are just ministering to them day by day, minute by minute. And a lot of times I think we forget that they are not just a part of us and, oh, let's go serve somewhere else. That we are serving here too. Every time we get them a cup of water or anything. Another group of women I love to read is the Femina Girls. Have you ever read any of their stuff?
Yes.
They're so good. And I was remembering one post. They said it's just a quote about being involved in a mercy ministry. And she said lots of times people think, oh, I wish I could be involved in a mercy ministry, but here I have all these kids. And she says, her quote, she says, but you are. Mothers have so many opportunities to extend mercy that they all run together. What is a hot meal on the table but a huge mercy? What is a clean pair of socks but more mercy? What is changing a soiled diaper on a child who can't even say, thanks, Mom, but mercy upon mercy? What is baking a pie to serve your people but pure, undefiled mercy? The mercy you extend to your family is very meaningful to them, and you are a blessing to them. Once you determine to see it that way, you will find the blessing that is waiting for you in it as well. And I think that really hits the heart of it, that every time, this cup of water is a blessing to somebody who can't get it for themselves.
Yes. I don't know about you, but I needed that exhortation about taking mealtime and turning it into a ministry. Come back next week as Tracy and I finish our discussion and talk about teaching our kids to cook. Thanks for listening to the Mom on Purpose podcast. For more information and all links and show notes, go to momonpurpose.com. You can make a huge difference in how many women find and benefit from this podcast. Please like Mom on Purpose on iTunes and take 2 minutes to leave a review. I'll meet you again next time to equip you to be a mom on purpose.